this tutorial, I'm showing you step by step how to create the most outstanding dark chocolate and brown butter Halloween cake. I'll show you how to master 7 essential Entremet layer techniques and how to build every layer of the cake from start to finish. My name is Louise and I'm a self-taught cake artist and recipe developer. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create the most irresistible dark chocolate and brown butter cake with a Halloween-inspired cake design. This video will teach you how to master 7 different Entremet techniques. A super moist chocolate cake, a crispy cocoa and Feulletine crunch layer, a silky smooth brown butter and milk chocolate with ganache, a soft brown butter and brown sugar caramel with dark chocolate, a rich dark chocolate mousse, a shiny mirror glaze, and how to make Halloween bad chocolate decoration. You can find the full recipe on my website, which you can access with a subscription. If you want to learn more about how to make elegant, layered and delicious Entremet cakes, you can now check out my online course, Master Entremet Cakes at Home, where I show you how to create professional quality cakes from start to finish, right from your own kitchen. Inside the course, I teach you my 5-step formula that I use for all my cakes: cake base, crunch, creamy element, mousse and decoration. You'll also learn how to make 5 of my signature Entremet cakes, different glazing techniques, discover recipe development and cake design, and also receive PDF troubleshooting guides and Excel recipe course material, giving you everything you need to start creating your own cakes at home. Alright, let's get started! To create the ultimate chocolate cake, I wanted to include my very best chocolate cake. This chocolate cake is super moist, super soft and yet stable to use for Entremet layering. To intensify the chocolate flavor even more, I added a bit more cocoa and coffee and increased the oil to ensure a balanced texture. To make the cake, I first mixed flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, baking powder, espresso powder and salt in a bowl. In another bowl, I'm whisking eggs, oil, sour cream, buttermilk and vanilla, and lastly add in coffee. The coffee brings out the chocolate flavor even more and balances the sweetness of the cake. I pour the cake into pastry rings, as we need 2 cakes, and bake them at 175 degrees fan-assisted oven for approximately 13 to 17 minutes. Once the cakes have cooled, I cut off the top so they're 1.5 cm tall and put the first chocolate cake in a clean pastry ring with acetate sheet. We'll save the other cake for later. I then put the cake in the freezer while preparing the next layer. In order to have a mix of moist, crunchy and creamy textures in the cake, I decided to add a crunchy element with cocoa and Feulletine. This crunch layer adds a balanced flavor with cocoa and a crisp bite to the cake. I start out by melting milk chocolate and then mix in Feulletine, Nutella, cocoa powder and salt. The salt here helps amplify the cocoa notes. I spread half of the crunch layer on top of the chocolate cake, level the layer and put the cake back in the freezer where it needs to set before we can add the next layer. We'll save the rest of the crunch for later. To add some richness and flavor contrast to the chocolate flavor, I decided to make something with brown butter. Because I just love the pairing of dark chocolate and brown butter, so I here decided to make my favorite brown butter with ganache. This one has the most nutty, toasted flavor and just an amazing fudgy texture. To make the ganache, I start out by making brown butter by heating butter in a pan until it has a dark caramelized color and smells nutty. Then the butter needs to cool until it has a more set consistency, kind of like soft butter. I chopped the milk chocolate, put it in a jug, heat heavy cream and glucose syrup almost to the boiling point before adding soaked gelatin and pouring it over the white chocolate. After it's set for around 1 minute, I blend until the mixture is combined, add the brown butter and blend again. Then the ganache needs to set in the fridge before we can assemble the cake. For the last cake element, I wanted to add something that would complement the bitter flavor from the chocolate, cocoa crunch and the dark chocolate mousse, but also at the same time add a different consistency than the whipped ganache. I therefore decided to make a smooth caramel with brown butter and brown sugar to match the toasted flavor from the brown butter whipped ganache. Lastly, I also ended up using 66% dark chocolate to balance the sweetness level of the caramel. First step here is to make the brown butter, like I showed you earlier, by heating butter in a pan until it has a dark caramelized color and smells nutty. Then the butter needs to cool. We can then heat heavy cream, brown sugar, brown butter, glucose syrup and sea salt in a pan where I heat it to 109 degrees, as this gives the caramel the correct texture and setting level to hold its shape inside the entremet cake. I take the caramel off the heat, pour it in a jug and add dark chocolate before hand blending to combine. Then the caramel needs to cool off in a plastic box before I can put it in a piping bag. And then we are finally ready to assemble the cake. We have now prepared all our cake elements and are therefore ready to assemble the cake. First, we need to finish the brown butter with ganache, where I whisk half of the ganache with a whisker before I put it in a piping bag. We'll whip up the rest later on when assembling the second part of the cake. I here spread a 1.5 cm layer of whipped ganache on top of the set crunch layer, level the surface and put the cake back in the freezer where it needs to set for around 20 minutes. The secret to getting a clean cake cut for this cake is really to make sure that the surface of the layer is set before adding the next layer. After the whipped ganache is set, I add a layer of the brown butter and dark chocolate caramel, level the surface and place the other chocolate cake on top. I then put the cake back in the freezer for approximately 10 minutes, just so the surface can set a bit before I add the remaining crunch layer. I make sure to level all layers in between in order to get a sharp and clean cake cut. While the crunch is setting in the fridge, I whip up the remaining brown butter with ganache and again spread a 1.5 cm thick layer on top. I yet again put the cake back in the freezer while the ganache needs to set for approximately 20 minutes before we can add one last layer of the brown butter and dark chocolate caramel. After leveling this last layer, we can now freeze the cake overnight. To add the most intense chocolate layer to this cake, I'm here making a dark chocolate mousse with 66% dark chocolate. This mousse has a super smooth, almost fudgy-like consistency and a rich, quite bitter chocolate flavor that pairs perfectly with the other cake layers. I here start out by melting dark chocolate and pouring it in a bowl. I then heat heavy cream almost to a boil, whisk in soaked gelatin, and pour the hot cream over the chocolate while stirring in the middle with a spatula. After it's cooled off, I whip heavy cream to a lightly whipped cream and fold it into the chocolate mixture. We then pour the mousse in a silicone mold and put in the frozen cake with the caramel facing downwards. Then the cake needs to freeze fully overnight. To make this into the ultimate dark chocolate cake with a Halloween-inspired cake design, I knew I wanted to go for a fully black color scheme. And what better way to cover the cake than with a shiny black mirror glaze. Since this is a chocolate cake, the glaze is also made with milk chocolate. I make the glaze by first putting milk chocolate in a jug, soaking gelatin sheets in cold water, and putting it aside while preparing the syrup.
In a pot, I'm heating sugar, water, heavy cream and glucose syrup almost to a boil, whisking in soaked gelatin before pouring it over the chocolate. I mix with an immersion hand blender, add black food coloring paste and mix again until it's fully black. The glaze then needs to cool to 34 to 35 degrees before we can glaze the cake. Once the glaze has cooled, I place the fully frozen cake on a baking cooling rack and pour the 34 to 35 degrees hot glaze over the cake. I remove the glaze excess by moving the cake around the baking cooling rack with 2 palette knives and place the cake on a cake plate. And then it's time for the final decoration. For this Halloween cake, I wanted to add a spooky element with chocolate bats. In addition, to add some sharp lines and definition to the cake, I also decided to make several different chocolate ribbons to go around the cake and also on top of the cake. I first put the 2 ribbons around the cake and then the 2 angled ribbons on top of the cake. I make the chocolate bats by pouring black colored tempered chocolate in between 2 large pieces of acetate sheet, leveling the surface with a rolling pin before putting the chocolate in the fridge so it can set. I then cut out chocolate bats with a bat cookie cutter, cut the bats in half with a hot knife, and assemble them again in a lifted shape with melted chocolate and cooling spray. This gives the wings of the bats a more dramatic effect and adds definition and movement to the cake design. Lastly, I place a bit of melted chocolate on the chocolate ribbons and fasten the chocolate bats with chocolate cooling spray. And here we have the final cake that I think is perfect for Halloween. This is one of the most chocolate intense cakes I've ever made, and I love how that's reflected from inside and out, with the black mirror glaze and the chocolate decoration adding a spooky touch.
This one is for all the chocolate lovers out there who cannot get enough chocolate, because this one is definitely the chocolate bomb. This cake is so rich, it has so much chocolate, but also perfectly balanced with brown butter, brown sugar, the soft caramel, and also the brick ganache. All the flavors perfectly balanced to make this the ultimate chocolate cake. I hope you get the chance to make this outstanding chocolate cake at home. And if you like my videos, make sure to subscribe. You can also check out my Entremet cake playlist here. See you in the next video.